Oh, hi. Today I want to know, why do we enjoy nostalgia? I'm CrossJLI and welcome to A Wonderful Waste of Time. Do you guys remember when video games wouldn't work, so you had to take the cartridge out and blow on it? Or when phones are like just phones, but also they folded in half? Or do you remember when you'd go around to all the public urinals and collect all the pee so that you could wash everyone's clothes? Only 390s kids remember. Everyone experiences nostalgia in some form or other. It can be a fun creative tool or a big marketing gimmick. Some people make it part of their everyday regular lives, and some people hate it and complain about there being too many shows set in the 80s, then go watch some twee Victorian nonsense where a bunch of rich people panic about making dinner because Lord Fumble-Tumble is coming over and there just isn't enough pheasant. My word! Dear God! Oh heavens! In this video I'll be looking into how it all works, how it affects us, and I'm sure I'll be giving you a healthy dose of nostalgia along the way. You guys remember when I did the intro with the P?
Oh, the old ones are the best.
Familiarity is one of the most commonly used tools in all of media, and I don't just mean making things relatable. I mean using a few simple, subtle things that are a constant throughout the project that help people get into the mindset of whatever media they're consuming. Whether it's Super Mario games using the same main theme in different arrangements, an auteur-director using similar shots to present an ongoing idea, or a painter using the same colour palette for a series of paintings. Once something's been established, the association can feel comforting and it ties everything together. It even happens here on YouTube, and I'm doing it too. I try to make my intros and outros similar so that they feel familiar and they're easier to get through. I set up to film in the exact same way, with the same shot, and I try to find a way to subtly ask you to subscribe so that I don't have to just jarringly shout it at you at the top of a video like a lot of other YouTubers do. In this video, it was that thing I said just then. So please subscribe so I don't have to become one of those YouTubers that tells you to beat the living shit out of the subscribe button. Please stick around and just gently press the subscribe button. Thank you. The long con version of this really comes into play with nostalgia, and not just in media. Going to a place you went to as a child and just recognising basic things like, whoa, that tree is still a tree. That building still has walls? No way, this place still has the sky? Trigger something in your brain that can not only make you feel a sense of belonging, but can also make you feel the way that you did when you were there before. This works particularly well for stuff from when you were a teenager, because that's when your body overloads you with the chemicals of emotion.
The chemicals of emotion, starring angst, embarrassment, self-loathing, a general sense of confusion, and doing really weird stuff because you don't know what else to do. Produced by an ongoing chemical imbalance, and directed by everyone around you telling you what to do, including your peers who also don't know what they're doing. Critics have called it awful, just really awful. The worst time of my life. And if I could go back and see it again, I wouldn't. This summer, try not to be a teenager so you don't get constantly bombarded by the chemicals of emotion.
So a song that you liked when you were 15 that gave you more dopamine than you could ever hope to fathom in your later life can still give you that same feeling through the emotional memory of what it was like to experience it for the first time. Most of your senses can create this feeling, firing up parts of your limbic system. The hippocampus, which is where memories are created, and the amygdala, which is the emotion centre. Supposedly the easiest one to do this with is scent. And while it would be hard to recreate a particular smell from your past, if you were to happen upon it, it will hit you like the friggin' memory train. AKA the boohoo choo-choo. These olfactory memories are also good at triggering involuntary memories, as theorised in the Proustian effect and also called a Proustian moment. Named after writer Marcel Proust, it's that sudden feeling of a memory hitting you, but you just don't know where it's from. It doesn't just apply to smell. You can certainly eat something and have it feel familiar but not be able to place it, but smell has the ability to bypass the thalamus, which is the sensory part of the brain, and go straight to the hippocampus and amygdala, so you often won't get the information about what the smell is and jump straight to the memory that's attached to it. I also think that this can work the other way around. I've personally experienced intrusive olfactory memories, where I've missed a particular person from my past and I could, without trying, smell them. Some mysterious fleeting version of their personal scent, their shampoo, their perfume, their deodorant, and I guess just their natural smell, whatever it was that was unique to them, just kept hitting me out of nowhere, and there was nothing logically creating the smell. And these strong scent-based memories are the reason that people use that fake new car smell, even in second-hand cars, and the reason that realtors make an open house smell like freshly baked bread or cookies, because it creates a concept of your ideals. And if there's something you've experienced before, it might make you nostalgic for them, because maybe it reminds you of sitting in your parents' new car as a kid, or maybe your grandparents made fresh bread and you could smell it when you went to visit them. These senses can also lead to an odd yearning for something nostalgic, like how I sometimes really crave those pepperoni pizza Lunchables. They were probably awful, so why do I still want them? I genuinely don't know, but sometimes it's all I can think about. So while it's easy to see nostalgia as just a cash-in on people's fondness for a lost time, or an excuse to make references and a hunt for some I remember that's from the audience, I'd also have to argue that it's a way to give people a chance to remember parts of their own story and create an emotional connection, like a big in-joke that people didn't know they were in on until somebody reminds them. So maybe part of the reason that media often relies on nostalgia is because it not only gives the creators an opportunity to express their experience of a time or place, but it also means that someone with similar memories can easily fit themselves into a character's shoes, because maybe they used to own a pair of those shoes when they were a kid.
Yeah, cartoons were so much better in the 90s.
So that was all very pleasant and positive, but unfortunately it's time to get real and negative, because I'm hungry. Hungry for the truth. And pizza Lunchables. Most people look back fondly on particular things from their past and often seem to think that the TV shows they watched and the music they listened to is better than whatever's popular now. There's 50 bajillion comments on old songs on YouTube with people saying, "They just don't make songs like this anymore. This is so much better than today's music. This is when people didn't need auto-tune." As though people don't still have the option to listen to those songs, which is what those people must have been doing while they were typing that comment. And how many times have you heard people say that cartoons were so much better in the 90s? I don't necessarily disagree with the notion, but I do disagree with a lot of the people saying it. Fair warning, this section is largely going to be about cartoons because it's something I care about, and it's a good example, but you can easily relate it to anything you want, like music, video games, probably sports. There are so many people who are very vocal about having that opinion, but don't watch cartoons anymore. So how can you think that your argument is valid if you don't know anything about what you're comparing them to? There are more layers to it. I'll talk about one of them in the next section, but for this one, let's focus on favouritism and memory. There's a form of bias that we have that we often don't know we're taking part in, but it's a pretty simple concept. It can be expressed in other forms, but it's all based on mediocrity. A simple example would be to say that most people don't care enough to write a 5 out of 10 star review, and by the same notion, most people wouldn't bother to read one either, because it's not noteworthy enough to make the effort. People mostly only care about something being particularly good or particularly bad. That's where something that's worth talking about lies. You probably remember great details of the stuff you really loved as a kid, and you probably remember quite a few things about things you really hated, but there's bound to be plenty more that you just didn't care about. And further down the line, unless something was really bad or straight up traumatic, you probably forgot a lot of the bad stuff too, because all of that information becomes irrelevant. So you probably won't remember a bad TV show from when you were 13 because it might have ended when you were 15. And now that you're an adult, why the heck would you still be dwelling on that? You may even have outgrown whatever your problem was with it in the first place. So when you remember all the cartoons you watched as a kid, you're going to be biased to the ones that you like. So your sample size for comparison has shifted towards the ones that you consider good. So comparing whatever's on right now to a curated list from across a decade isn't particularly fair. You can't just take a list of 10 things that you loved and compare it to whatever happens to be on at the moment. I made a list of what I'd personally consider to be good 90s kids cartoons, so no Simpsons or South Park, and including shows that started in the 80s but were still on in the mid-90s, and avoiding the big yellow square that did start in 1999, but considering it's been on ever since, I don't think it can be considered a 90s cartoon. It looks like a good list, like a very good pick of 10 genuinely good shows from the 90s, but it's not accurate. A lot of those weren't released in the same year. Rocko's Modern Life was only being shown on the same day as Powerpuff Girls if it was being repeated. So let's bring it down to just the shows that were on in 1995. You lose a lot of good stuff, but we can fill in some of the spaces with other things that I remember liking, like Sonic and Biker Mice from Mars. But it becomes a bit harder to fill in the rest of the spaces because what the fuck are any of these shows? I don't remember Super Chunk. SWAT Cats looks cool, but I don't remember that either. And Two Stupid Dogs seems familiar, but having watched some clips of it, I can see why I don't remember it.
Hey, what's my name?
Weenie Pants.
That's not my name.
Booger.
No!
Stinky.
No!
I don't know.
It's still a good lineup. I'm not arguing against that at all. As I said before, I do agree that the 90s was a particularly good time for cartoons. But it's still blown out of proportion if you focus on the 20 great cartoons and forget about the 100 less good ones. Now compare the original list to this one of shows from the noughts. I can put SpongeBob back in now because this is when it was at the height of its popularity. It's also when Fairly Odd Parents was at its best. Samurai Jack was critically acclaimed, and Avatar is often considered one of the greatest shows ever made, cartoon or otherwise. Even if I do the same thing and make it just shows from 2005, I can replace Phineas and Ferb and Samurai Jack with Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends and the hugely underrated Fillmore. Of course there were a lot of worse cartoons. I liked Robot Boy, but it was never particularly good. My Gym Partner Was a Monkey is a big no from me. And I've not even added on a couple of the good weird shows that are a bit more niche, like Flapjack and Chowder. Then you could do the same thing with the 10s. If you're looking across a whole decade, it's pretty easy. And I probably watched way less cartoons at this point, but I can still fill up a top 10 off the top of my head. There are probably some better things that I haven't seen that could easily go up there, but it's still a very good list. Adventure Time and Steven Universe are beloved, and I'd put Gravity Falls up as one of my favourites of all time. And again, this is just talking about the kids' shows. We haven't talked about Futurama, BoJack Horseman, Rick and Morty, Disenchanted, Final Space, the 1,000 cartoons on Netflix now, or every fucking anime. The point I'm making is, maybe instead of comparing a tailored list of your childhood favourites to a bunch of shows that you probably don't watch unless you're still as into cartoons as I am, you should just be thankful that there's so much good stuff to watch. So, are 90s cartoons better than the later decades? I don't know. Maybe there was a higher quantity of higher quality shows, but to make it sound like there was nothing at all in the next 20 years, that's absurd.
Yeah, honestly, this place was much better when I used to live here.
The other layer to it, and this section will be less about cartoons, is that your circumstances might be different to what they once were. It's a common retort when people complain and say things aren't what they used to be, for people to reply with, maybe it's not about the thing, maybe it's you that's changed. And that's absolutely correct. To touch on the cartoons thing one last time, maybe the reason you prefer 90s cartoons, person in their 20s or early 30s, is because you were a child when they came out. You may still enjoy cartoons, but you can't possibly be watching them with the same mindset. You're naturally more analytical, more cynical, you have more experience to compare what's happening in the shows to, and the shows just weren't designed to be liked by you. Though I do think that for a long time cartoons have also tried to appeal to adults, both for the sake of parents watching it with children and children that grow up and still want to watch it, and just for the sake of the people creating it who want to put some of their own experiences into the work. But even then, you just function differently. If you're trying to approach something with the mindset of what you liked as a child compared to what you like now as an adult, it's going to be different. There's a psychological testing notion that you can never get truly correct results from someone who knows that they're being tested. You couldn't not tell someone, that would be unethical. So you have to find a way to have them agree to being tested without knowing what the test is, or work around the fact that they know that they're being tested. This is because when someone knows that you're trying to get specific information out of them, they either try to give you the information because they want to please you, or they try to hide the information because they're defensive of their privacy. Even just a minor word choice can subconsciously change what a test participant is willing to share, which skews all of the data you're collecting. I think that applies to this situation too, because now as an adult, if you're choosing to compare the cartoons, then you're judging them all by comparison rather than just enjoying the show. With a few incredibly rare exceptions, you probably weren't watching cartoons as an 8-year-old and comparing them to the cartoons you watched when you were 4. Like, well, it's good, but how does it compare to Baba, the Elephant King? And beyond that, maybe it's not just that you fit the criteria as a viewer better, but also that you enjoyed everything more then. You can give a child 10p and they'll think they're rich. They don't have to pay taxes. When they cry, someone rushes over to help them. Now you cry privately because the world is awful. A child just exists and most people who pass them on the street adore them. Now you as an adult have probably been abandoned by at least one person you love. As an adult, you may create a well-researched and well-written YouTube show that you can't convince people to watch. Sometimes a kid will sneeze and people will act like it's the most amazing thing they've ever fucking seen. The point is, the stuff that you might remember fondly from being a kid may in fact just be being a kid. What? The point is, the thing that you might remember fondly from being a kid may not be the thing itself. It might just be a fondness for being a kid. This applies to many other situations. A lot of older people talk about how much better the world used to be, but there are many, many ways in which it was not. What they probably liked was that they were younger. They could go out and do more, they probably knew more people, and they could enjoy new experiences because they were more open to them. Maybe there's a band that you used to like that you connected with a partner over, and now you're not together, you don't listen to the band as much anymore. You tell yourself that the band's just not as good, but really you just miss being in that relationship. It's not the band's fault. And I think probably the most common is people talking about a place. People who return to somewhere they used to live and say, oh, it was much nicer when I was living here. And maybe it was, but it might also be that you liked it because you were living there. You ignored more of the faults and you probably knew more about the good stuff that you're now out of the loop about because you don't live there anymore. And it's very likely that a lot of the things you liked about that place weren't the place. It's the memories of the people you knew there and the things you did. And now you're doing that all somewhere else. Things change and you're one of them. So maybe it isn't the place that's got worse, it's just that your concept of that place doesn't exist anymore. Which sounds kind of sad, but that's the only way that things evolve to be good for new people. To sum it all up, if you're some bloke in his 50s who complains that that building over there used to be your favourite disco where you did coke and harassed women when you were 19 and how these fucking millennials have turned it into a cafe that serves bao buns, avocado toast and IPA, maybe the problem isn't that things have changed. It's just that you must be in a massive cunt, Colin. You geriatric fuck. And I don't even like avocados.
Oh look, it's another show set in the fucking 80s.
Now that we know a bunch about what tickles our nostalgic pickles, let's look at how creators and marketers use it and how we can utilise it for ourselves. People in recent years like to make it sound as though nostalgia returned to the world when Stranger Things became popular, as though no other show had ever been set in the past. And that creators taking inspiration from some films that they loved and turning the influence into one story was something crazy and unheard of. So nobody saw any Quentin Tarantino movies. We're just going to forget that The Magnificent Seven is a remake of Seven Samurai. Why? None of you fucks seen Star Wars? Being inspired by other works is still talked about like some big taboo, when in reality it's normal and it's sensible. Nobody learns how to do anything without first looking at the foundations that were built by their predecessors. I mean, nobody shows up after a house has finished being built and says, "Walls and a roof, mate. You're a fucking rip-off." And that goes for anyone mimicking a particular style or era too. It gets the point across, it adds to the story, and frankly it's just enjoyable. And it makes no sense when people complain about Stranger Things and other shows being set in the 80s, when there are so many older people who are like, movies were so much better in the 80s. And then when it's become popular for everything to be set in the 80s, they've turned to, ugh, why is everything set in the 80s? Oh no, did baby get what they wanted? But the thing that will make your creation work for nostalgia is putting in things that work just for you. Nostalgia shouldn't be the focus, it should be the byproduct of a story. If you were a teenager in the 90s, then a story that includes things that you liked in the 90s will be relatable for people, but the focus should still be on the story. Whether it's about you or entirely fictional, sprinkling in those real-world relatable things will set a tone for people. Similarly, if you want to write about the 70s and you weren't there, maybe you have a parent or know someone that you can tap up for those little details to make it feel more authentic. Alternatively, you can just do a lot of really deep research. Most of these things are out there are plenty of people talking about them. Because it can also feel off-putting for an audience if you get those details wrong. Stuff that you think happened in a particular decade wasn't necessarily entirely contained within that decade. Media likes to use nostalgia to sell an idea of a decade that just isn't real. Not everyone in the 80s was dressed as the 80s. There's always going to have been people who are still into the 70s, or the 60s. Or fucking medieval times, they were nerds. And culture doesn't just suddenly end when a decade does. The 80s didn't disappear overnight on January 1st, 1990, and there was a bunch of people going, wait, who are Duran Duran? I only listen to Biggie. It's the 90s. So if you're putting in something that was brand new in the year that your work is set, and have characters act like it's a completely regular thing for them and everyone knows about it, then people are going to notice because it's inauthentic. It's always worth researching that kind of stuff and playing it safe, because getting something like that wrong can completely take an audience out of the moment. The last thing you need is someone's suspension of disbelief being shattered so that they can have a conversation with someone else about how you got that thing wrong. You can also use it as an opportunity to create some false nostalgia. Make up a brand that fits in with the setting and the time period. This is a great way to build up lore. This is often well utilised in games, especially ones like Fallout that have created loads of fictional brands that add to the world and have become recognisable symbols of the franchise. Nuka-Cola in particular is well known enough in the gaming world that people who've never played the game before know what it is and where it's from. And while it's very obvious what it's based on, making it fictional means that it can have its own history that ties into the game world, and doesn't cause any legal disputes. But if you're looking to dial up the nostalgia, it's best to stick with what people know, as this can only create a familiar feeling and doesn't have the specificity of real-world references. It's also a recent trend to reboot old properties in a different way, most commonly the gritty remake. This builds up interaction before anything's even come out, because people just know the name and are curious as to how it's been changed. Often in a negative way, because there have been so many bad and pointless remakes of things that people are pretty quick to jump against them before giving them a chance. But that's still attention, so if the show turns out to be good, it's already got an audience, even if those people weren't expecting much from it. They've made dark, teenagery versions of Winx Club, Archie comics, and Sabrina the Teenage Witch, which I actually quite like. But they're just taking all these little innocuous things from old stuff and turning it all into drugs and toxic relationships and cheating and murder and gangs and Satanism if it's Sabrina the Teenage Witch. It's all based on the idea that people who watched or read that stuff when they were kids and it was for kids will now be adults and want to see the adult version of it for some reason that's not clear to anyone. Especially when they seem to make it all about teenagers, which just doesn't make sense, except for when it's about Sabrina the Teenage Witch. But Archie comics were popular in the 50s. Do they really think that there's a bunch of 8-year-olds tuning in and getting all horned up over Cole Sprouse's Jughead? Oh, I just wish he'd put a proper shirt on before he catches himself a cold. I'm in my 20s and Archie comics were too old to still be a thing when I was a kid. So what was the point of them using that property other than to create intrigue into how weird it is that they used it? Much like how there was a leaked script for them doing a version of the Powerpuff Girls in this style. I'm a big fan of that and I think it's stupid that they're doing it, but I want to find out more out of morbid curiosity. The script has a secret meth operation, an unnecessary sex scene, desperate attempts at buzzwordy slang, Bubbles is a recovering addict for some reason, and at one point, Blossom and Buttercup threaten to leak her nudes. It's an awful attempt at understanding young people, clearly done by people who don't understand my generation, let alone people who are 19 now. Which should have been obvious from the get-go, considering one of the writers is Diablo Cody, whose writing I like, but someone in their 40s just doesn't know what it's like to be a teenager right now. Which is why she does a much better job of writing things like Young Adult and Tully, and why if someone that age wants to write something about being 19, they should set it when they were 19. Then all the situations and slang will make more sense, and it will create the good kind of nostalgia where characters feel more real and become relatable. As opposed to Riverdale, which every time I've heard a plot point from sounds like someone on Facebook retelling a story they misunderstood about their niece. And my niece said that every single one of her friends was sending nudies on the TikToks in exchange for crack cocaine. Personally, I think they should lean into it being a bit more tongue-in-cheek. In fact, I think it'd be funny to do it with a lot of British kids' TV shows, like Bernard's Watch. Because I think there's only so long that most people could go with a magic watch that stops time before they become a huge perv or rob a bank or something. They could do the Queen's nose and have her 7 wishes be the deadly sins. That'd be cool. They could do the demon headmaster but have him actually just gruesomely murder all of the students. Or they could remake Brum in the style of Christine. It's all there. Overall, I guess I'd say while it can be very gimmicky in some things, you can really use nostalgia to add a lot to a story. Not just in tone, but you can also make in-jokes and references that are nice for fans to share. And it doesn't have to just be about making people go, oh, I remember that. It can also add authenticity. Some of it might even go pretty unnoticed by most people, because it just makes your story make sense.
You've got to come back with me!
Where?
Present. We're going back to the present.
So nostalgia is more than just fondness for a time period. It's more about your personal memories of a person, place, food, culture, or whatever. But it's more unique to you than anything that a TV show, film, book, or game is capable of showing. There are probably a couple of things that are only nostalgic for you alone, because nobody has the same memories of those things that you do. It doesn't need to be a gimmicky thing. It can be genuine and honest, and give something a unique touch that's hard to capture in other ways. But most of all, it's not something worth friggin' arguing about. Stop thinking that the things that you remember are better than current things. They're better for you because they apply to you. So maybe get over yourself a little bit. For further research for this video, check out Tom Scott's video explaining how 90s video filters are made. A lot of people like that weird old grainy look at the moment, myself included, and Tom Scott's one of the reasons I started making this show, so if you don't know who he is, go check him out. If you use TikTok, I'd recommend Dinosaur Dinner Theatre, who uses old footage and dubs over it in a 50s narrator voice and makes it both weird and funny. It's sort of a nostalgia parody for retro adverts and instructional videos, and I just like it a lot. If you want to try out something that's very nostalgic for me, there's a company called Skunkarpe who remade one of the Sam & Max games in a more modern style. There are a bunch of people who used to work for Telltale, who used to be one of my favourite games companies, before it turned out they were a bunch of shits and then shut down. And it'd be really good to support the creators that got screwed over by them and give them a chance to continue the series. That's it for this episode. Please subscribe, turn on the notification bell and tell all of your friends, because I don't want to be one of those things you didn't follow up on and gets forgotten about. Please. Please subscribe and never forget me. I'm fading out of existence because you haven't subscribed. No! No!
Hey, thanks for watching. Hopefully this managed to give you a different perspective on nostalgia while maybe giving you some nostalgia too. And if you can think of any weird, unique, personal nostalgia, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. If you like this video, please like this video. If you want to see more, you should subscribe and click on one of the videos on screen now. If you have a question I should answer, let me know in the comments, and if you know someone who'd enjoy this video, why not send them a link. Bye.